My mother-in-law insisted that I let my sister-in-law and her new husband from her third marriage move into my house after my husband passed away. I agreed, moved, and left them with all the bills 4 months ago. I lost my husband. I still can't believe it as I write this because I still feel like he's here with me every day. I'm always hoping to wake up tomorrow and realize it was all just a terrible nightmare. He came back from work one day, and after being home for about half an hour or so, he suddenly collapsed on the floor. Of course, I immediately called the emergency number. They sent an ambulance to our house and told me to perform CPR on him. But even though I tried, I probably didn't do it right because I had never learned before. My husband basically died in my arms. It happened so fast, a matter of minutes. The ambulance arrived just to confirm his passing. Then the police came and asked me a lot of questions. The doctors took his body, and they told me an autopsy would be necessary because there was no obvious reason for his death. I agreed, of course. Even if they hadn't said it was necessary, I would have requested it because I needed to know why it happened. In my head, nothing made sense. He was only 33, young and healthy. I couldn't imagine any reason why he would just pass away like that. After everyone left, I was in shock. Felt like I was losing my mind. I cried, I talked to myself, and I talked to God, even though I'm not very religious. Then I composed myself enough to call my mother-in-law and tell her what happened. My mother-in-law never liked me from the moment we met. I don't know what I did to make her hate me. I've always been polite to her, so I didn't know what her problem was. For example, I was never included in family events like trips. When my husband was alive, she really didn't seem interested in talking to me or being with me. And she made mean comments about me being there for my partner when he was going through a tough time because he trusted me and not her. I never crossed her boundaries and always did my best when I was around her to get to know him as well as I could. But unfortunately, she never saw my efforts. She was cold to me and ignored me for no reason at family events. She even talked over me several times, deliberately ignoring me. My husband noticed this and tried to talk to her several times about it, but she never changed. Whenever we met, she never asked me about my career, my parents, or how my life was going. My mother-in-law even called me a snob and spoiled just because my parents sent me to a private school, and she was a public school teacher. My conversation with her always centered around her son. I know she even tried to convince my husband not to marry me and told him to keep looking for a better partner than me. Fortunately, my husband didn't care about her opinion and asked me to marry him anyway. When my mother-in-law found out he had proposed, she freaked out and called to tell me I should strive to be the best wife for him and take care of him the way she had taken care of him all these years. I was a little offended, but I tried not to let her words offend me anymore. She didn't even make an effort to congratulate me, even though my husband had called to inform her. My husband and I had already decided to pay for our own wedding, so when she and my sister-in-law offered to pay half, we graciously declined. This made them even more upset, and they started telling my husband how sad they were that he no longer needed them. To come to an agreement, we told them we would love it if they wanted to organize the rehearsal dinner for us. They agreed, and we appreciated the gesture. However, as the wedding approached, things took an unexpected turn. On the night before the wedding, they embarrassed me in front of family and friends, saying they couldn't wait for the wedding preparations to be over and how stressful it had been, despite not contributing financially or in any planning. Despite this, we hoped the rehearsal dinner would be a positive experience. When I offered to help, they declined, saying everything was under control. However, upon arrival, it was evident that the preparations didn't go as planned. The rehearsal dinner turned out to be a collection of plastic tablecloths on picnic tables and cold Mexican food. During the wedding, they continued to act upset, which made the whole celebration a bit awkward. My mother-in-law got drunk and started behaving inappropriately with other guests, so we had to ask my sister-in-law to take her outside. My mother-in-law protested, trying to justify her behavior, but my sister-in-law was firmly, and eventually she left. My husband reprimanded my mother-in-law firmly. The next day, they had a big fight. Since that day, both my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law had as little contact with us as possible. Years went by without us speaking to them. So when my husband passed away, I had to gather the courage to call my mother-in-law to tell her what had happened. When I told her, she couldn't believe it at first, and then she started blaming me. She was shouting that it was my fault, that I had killed her son, and that she was going to make me pay for it. I never thought she would support or comfort me in these difficult times, but I also wasn't expecting a reaction like this. The next day, the doctor contacted me and informed me that the initial results of my husband's autopsy revealed the cause of death to be a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that blocked the main pulmonary artery. The doctor basically told me that my husband didn't stand a chance. I couldn't have done absolutely anything, and even if the ambulance had been there with us, they couldn't have done anything either. I received a copy of the results and called my mother-in-law again to inform her about the results. She listened to the result and seemed a bit calmer, so I thought she would be okay. We agreed that she would come to my house that night to talk about the funeral and everything else. Little did I know what was about to happen. She arrived that night, but she wasn't alone. She was with the police and my sister-in-law. We live in a relatively small town, and we only have one police station in our area. They were the same officers who had come to my house on the day my husband passed away and had already asked me about his death. They remembered me, but my mother-in-law started telling them that I was guilty, that I had taken her son's life, and that I had planned everything. She really thought they would arrest me with her speech. I remained calm and informed the police that I was ready to show them the copy of the autopsy I had received earlier. They agreed, and I fetched it to show them. The police read the copy and tried to explain to her that her son died because of a medical condition that no one could have caused. My sister-in-law, in turn, started arguing with them, saying they shouldn't believe the paper, that anyone can print fake documents these days. The officers tried to convince them as much as they could, but they kept shouting and making a scene. They were really kind to me, told me not to worry, and then left because obviously there was no crime. They were furious about it and swore they would put me in jail anyway. I wasn't worried about their words because I knew I was innocent, and the authorities knew it too. The next point of contention was the funeral. My husband and I never really talked about it because we were quite young to think about it and didn't plan on losing our lives so soon. However, I remember once when we attended someone's funeral last year, my husband said how he would like to be cremated instead of buried when he died, and that's what I thought of doing. I was going to cremate him and give him a traditional burial. So when she found out about my idea, she started shouting at me again. She said something like, "Ah, you just want to get rid of my son's body, so there's no evidence against you, don't you? You planned everything." My sister-in-law, who was nearby, joined her and accused me of trying to erase any evidence and planning all this just to hurt them. I was starting to lose patience with their cruel words. I held my ground and told them that if they wanted to bury something of his so badly, they could bury his ashes. My mother-in-law threatened to sue me, but I laughed because I knew there was nothing she could do. She even told me how I allowed the hospital to disfigure her son, referring to the autopsy. I looked at her incredulously and asked her what she meant by that. I explained to her that it was a necessary procedure that the hospital deemed necessary, and we needed to know why my husband died so suddenly. She then started accusing me of killing him because of the growing pressures in our marriage. I scoffed and informed her that we were a dual income, no kids household, so we had absolutely no tension at home. I assured her what happened to him was completely unexpected and had nothing to do with any domestic stress. As if these arguments weren't enough, the two of them continued to argue with me in the following days over unnecessary things. When I was arranging the funeral music, venue, and casket, my mother-in-law even didn't want certain people to attend, and I said, "It's not a funeral for me, it's for my husband, and he would have wanted those people there. Anyone who wants to say goodbye to him one last time is welcome." I could see the resentment on her face, but there was nothing she could do. After the funeral, we had to go and meet with the lawyer to discuss my husband's will, and as the lawyer read the document, it became clear that my husband had left everything to me. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law completely lost it. Accusations were flying like arrows. They accused me of finishing off my husband for the money and labeled me a gold digger. I couldn't believe their words. Their reaction was not only hurtful but also completely unfounded. The pain of losing my husband was already overwhelming, and their baseless accusations only heightened the anguish. Somehow, my mother-in-law believed that her son would have lived if he hadn't married me, and that he died because of life with me. I understood she was hurt. She was a mother and lost her son. So despite all the attention, I always held my tongue. Understanding her grief clouded her judgment. But I didn't deserve this treatment. I loved him too. I told them it wasn't fair for them to blame me for my husband's death and that I had enough financial stability. So my husband didn't need to leave anything to me. But he did because he loved me, and if they had a problem with that, they were welcome to form their own opinion, but I wasn't going to sit here listening to them vent their anger on me. I made it clear to them that they were welcome to contact me when they calmed down and understood how ridiculous and unfounded their accusations were. 2 months passed without anyone contacting me. This was already a tumultuous time in my life, and honestly, I was just happy they weren't making things harder. My parents spent several weeks with me at home because I was too scared to be alone. Every corner of my house reminded me of my dear husband. I spent countless nights crying myself to sleep. My father, seeing my state, subtly suggested that I sell the house so I could live with them for a while, and my mother agreed. They were worried about me, but I didn't want to give up my house because it seemed like the last connection I had with my husband, and I was afraid to let it go. Last month, out of the blue, my mother-in-law called, breaking the silence. Surprisingly, she asked how I was and inquired about the well-being of the house. Her unexpected denial caught me off guard, and I hesitated for a moment. Despite the challenging history, I tried to keep the conversation civil and updated her on my situation. I mentioned the ongoing struggle to adjust to life without my husband, the difficulty of dealing with grief, and the emotional weight of being in the house that held memories of happier times. Then, out of nowhere, my mother-in-law dropped a bomb. She immediately informed me that my sister-in-law had remarried. I was shocked because I wasn't invited, but she told me they didn't want to bother me since I was still mourning my husband. I found it a bit strange that my sister-in-law could marry someone I hadn't even heard of. My mother-in-law then continued, saying that she had decided that since she didn't have her own place, she had asked her and her new husband from the third marriage to move into my house. I was shocked by her demand and struggled to form words. I asked if she was kidding, but my mother-in-law continued, saying she was dead serious and that she and her husband deserved to live together after marriage. However, she didn't have space in her own house to accommodate them, so she asked them to move into my house. The weight of this announcement hung in the air, and I found myself trying to compose a response amid the whirlwind of emotions now surrounding me. I explained to her that this was my house now and that the idea of someone else moving in with me so abruptly without asking for my permission felt invasive and overwhelming. I told her I would be happy to host her and her new husband for a few days if that's what they wanted, but I didn't want them to move in with me for weeks. However, my mother-in-law insisted, emphasizing that my husband had left the house to me and now that I was living alone, making room for my sister-in-law and her husband was expected of me as a good daughter-in-law if I still wanted to be part of their family. Despite my efforts to convey my feelings and reservations, she remained firm in her position, making it clear that her decision was non-negotiable. The weight of her words left me dealing with a feeling of helplessness. Despite protesting that this was my house, my mother-in-law argued that as a widow living alone, I had space and resources to accommodate them temporarily. Frustrated and unwilling to engage in a prolonged argument, I was about to tell her that if she and her husband showed up at my door, I would call the police. But suddenly an idea popped into my mind. I knew that living in this house where I shared countless memories with my husband would be difficult in the long run since I would continue to be reminded of him everywhere. So, if she and her new husband wanted to live in this house, they were welcome to as long as they paid their own bills. I also knew that if I told her that at that moment, she wouldn't agree and would turn it into a problem. So, I stayed quiet and simply decided to agree with her absurd demand. I called my parents and informed them of my plan with my sister-in-law, and they said they would support me. I slowly started packing my things so I could live with my parents, making space for my sister-in-law and her husband while transferring the utility bills to my sister-in-law's name. I diligently contacted each utility provider, informed them of the recent changes in occupancy, and asked about the essential steps to update billing information. I filled out the necessary forms so they would now be billed in my sister-in-law's name. When the day came for them to move in, I handed over the keys and explained that as a wedding gift, they would have the entire house to themselves. My sister-in-law was ecstatic and called my mother-in-law excitedly, who seemed satisfied that her daughter and her new spouse could live without any hassle. I think they both believed that I had given in to their demands and given up my house. I moved back to my parents' house and have been living with them ever since. My parents still kept my old room, so it's nostalgic to be back here. I feel much better here than I did in my house. When the month ended, the bills started coming, but they were addressed not to me but to my sister-in-law. Electricity, water, and other utility bills, all in her name. Confused and frustrated, she called me demanding an explanation. That's when I calmly informed her that since she and her mother wanted to live in my house, they would be responsible for all the bills. Before I moved, I had transferred all the bills to her name, except for the deed to the house. She exploded in anger, yelling and expressing her displeasure. She threatened that she wouldn't pay the bills. I scoffed at her and said that if she didn't pay the bills on time, she would have to pay the fines that would come in her name as well. This made her even more furious, and she continued to yell while I smiled, satisfied. Shortly after, my mother-in-law called, yelling at me for daring to charge her daughter for the bills. She claimed that my sister-in-law and her husband couldn't afford it as they were nearly bankrupt and that I should pay the bills out of the kindness of my heart. I firmly told her that would never happen, and after arguing with me for a while, she announced that because of my stubbornness in not paying their bills, my sister-in-law and her husband were now planning to move out because they couldn't afford the utilities. I told her I would be happy to have my house back, and my mother-in-law accused me of being heartless and prioritizing money over family. I said nothing to her, and she angrily hung up the phone. The tables had turned, and I felt relieved at the prospect of regaining control of my house. What was initially my mother-in-law's plan to bother me had turned against her and my sister-in-law. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that not only had I stood my ground but also exposed the hypocrisy of their demands. However, I feel a little guilty, and I'm here on Reddit wondering if what I did makes me a bad person. Update. Thank you to everyone who showed their support for me. I've been so sad since my husband passed away, but reading all your comments and your personal experiences with loss makes me feel a little better, knowing I'm not alone. To answer the most important question everyone keeps asking about why I allowed my sister-in-law and her husband to move in first is because my mother-in-law is not an easy person to argue with. She is extremely narcissistic and will do anything to get what she wants. I also knew that since the lawyer announced that my husband had left the house to me, she had her eyes on it. My sister-in-law is just a pawn in her game, doing what her mother wants. I'm sure they thought that when I moved, they had cleared the way to take over the house and didn't expect any retaliation from me. My sister-in-law and her husband moved out, and she begged me to pay the outstanding bills because she doesn't have the money and doesn't want to be penalized. I agreed to pay the bills for the last month to clear her debt, and then I will transfer the bills to my name. Now that she won't be staying in the house anymore, I think my sister-in-law learned a valuable lesson. Update 2. It's been an interesting week since the last update. As you know, since my last update, my sister-in-law moved out of my house frustrated after finding out the bills were coming in her name. I paid her debts as soon as I saw that she had actually moved out of the house. I changed all the locks in the house, and for now I'm still living with my parents. 2 days ago, my mother-in-law contacted my parents to complain about how disrespectful I've been. She kept calling me and yelling at me for what I did to my sister-in-law, but I think she wanted to take it to the next level. She called my mother's phone in the morning to tell her how difficult I'm making her life by forcing her to live with my sister-in-law and her new husband when I could easily offer my house to them and pay their bills. My mother, who knows all of my mother-in-law's tricks, calmly explained to her that I now needed to take care of myself first and that she should take care of her own daughter. She encouraged the married couple to move out and live on their own instead of relying on a widow like me to take care of them. My mother-in-law didn't expect this reaction and tried to justify it by saying that any good daughter-in-law would have done it. But why was it me she had to live with such disappointment? My mother retorted that the real disappointment was her and her own daughter for expecting someone else to take care of them and warned that the next time she called me or threatened me, we would go the legal route. This scared my mother-in-law, and she tried to say it wasn't that important, but my mother wasn't willing to accept it. Seeing my mother defend me was good, and it taught me that my mother-in-law was just a big bully who forced people to meet her expectations. Since then, She and my sister-in-law haven't contacted me, and I pray they continue to stay away from me. I'm thinking of selling my house so I can start over in a new place where they can't just show up unannounced and disturb my peace ever again. Update 3. It's been 3 months since my last update. I finally put my house up for sale. The decision wasn't easy and brought many mixed feelings. It was sad to leave behind a place full of memories, but it also felt like a step toward a new beginning. I've been talking to a therapist to help me deal with all the emotions. It's been a safe space to talk about what I'm going through and find ways to cope. Therapy has been really helpful in helping me understand myself better and figuring out how to deal with grief. Grieving is hard, and each day is different. Some days are very sad, and others are a bit more hopeful. I'm learning to accept the ups and downs. Having people around me who care has made a big difference. Friends and family have been there for me through it all. It's not always easy, but I'm learning more about myself and feeling stronger every day.